Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. In addition to being the host of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I have 3 published novels. My latest is titled Lolita Firestone, a supernatural novel, and it is set in Sedona, Arizona and Cairo, Egypt. My previous novel is titled Family Recipes, a novel about Italian culture, Catholic guilt, and the culinary crime of the century. And my first novel is named Hardwood, a novel about college basketball and other games young men play. And that story deals with issues ranging from depression and racism to sex, religion, and university politics. All 3 novels are listed in the episode notes. I hope you will buy them, I hope you will read them, and I hope you will thoroughly enjoy them. Now, on with our program. This is Mike Consul, your host. In the spotlight is Kate Manning, the author of the critically acclaimed novels My Notorious Life and WHITEGIRL. The New York Times called My Notorious Life an action-packed, thought-provoking page-turner. O Magazine called it daring and astonishingly current. National Public Radio's Kurt Anderson, host of Studio 360, said it's a fantastic yarn, absolutely Dickensian. And novelist Marisa Silver writes, Axie Muldoon is as fierce and alive a character as I have read in recent fiction. My Notorious Life is an essential novel for our time. And, Kate, welcome to the program. And that is some very high praise. That's, well, what can I say? It's just very high praise from some important places. Congratulations on My Notorious Life, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks a lot. It's it's really nice to hear those words from people that I respect a lot, after working for a long, long time in the dark and, never knowing if a book would be published. So it's great to hear that. And thank you for your introduction. It's great to be on Spotlight.
Yes. I have to say that I haven't read all of your stuff, but I've read enough to see that what you do, there are people who write good stories, and, good storylines tend to be kind of a dime a dozen, but to write a good storyline, get critical acclaim because of the beauty of the writing, is the creativity of the writing. You're in that space. I mean, I can see that very clearly. And when you see a writer who pays a lot of attention, sentence by sentence, to what he or she is saying, it really shows. It lifts off the page. Tell me, though, about My Notorious Life. You have another novel named WHITEGIRL, which I had mentioned. You have another one called GILDED Mountain. So this is number 3. Where does it rank in terms of the 3 novels that you have written, either in qualitative terms or the birthing process? What could you say about it, that My Notorious Life vis-a-vis your other work?
That's a really interesting question, because I guess to me, when I pick up a book, a novel, I look for a strong voice, kind of a narrator who is going to grab you by the throat and say, I have a story for you, so listen up. And it's hard to find a voice like that that's distinctive in a sort of the modern middle class white woman vernacular and the kind of the way I talk. And so I was looking for a strong voice, and I wondered where I might find something that was interesting and unusual. And I looked in the past, and that was really what got me started. I found a story of a young girl who was one of the many 30,000 orphans on the streets of New York. And I discovered the orphan trains, which was a story I'd never heard of. And once I got this scrappy young girl on the train, I wanted to get her back to New York because I was writing about the city. And I stumbled on the story of a midwife and an abortionist who practiced in the city for many years, the true story. And I'd never heard of her either. And, after some deliberation, this young girl grows up to borrow some of the history of Madame Restel. And so for me, the voice was the most important, because it was quite liberating to write in this Irish American 1800s vocabulary with lots of slang. And I love the English language. It's so full of borrowed words from many other languages, and it was a real celebration for me of getting to play around with that.
You know, you mentioned voice, and writers can spend their entire careers trying to find their voice. Now, in your case, do you look to establish a voice that is a consistent voice throughout your writing? For instance, if I was to pick up, any reader was to pick up with novel number 4 or novel number 1, they would say, that's Kate Manning. I recognize her, and there's an intimacy there. Or, I mean, just based on what you said, it sounds like you had to adapt a different voice or adopt a different voice for My Notorious Life.
I don't know. I can't tell you whether people would find it consistent across the work. Maybe some of the sense of humor certainly would be there, but I used to, in college, I did a lot of acting. And so I feel as if you find a character and then you try to adopt that character's mannerisms and patterns of speech and rhythms, and that's what helps you make a character distinct. So I really can't say whether they're consistent, but I do think a strong voice is finding one is really akin to acting and channeling the personality of your narrator or narrators.
Now, you lose a lot of sleep because of your writing, don't you? I heard you say, I'm a terrible sleeper. So is your head always at work? Are the characters, the situations always incubating in your head, even as you put your head on the pillow? And is that the reason why your sleep is so spotty?
I don't know. Maybe you can psychoanalyze me here, but I think that's right. I think for so many writers, it's a blessing and a curse, because one, I'm never bored. I am always, imagining that something is other than what it is, and living in a story or an alternate reality. But yes, I think a lot of times my best ideas come to me at 2:00 in the morning, and I have to get up and write them down. And often when I look at them later, they're terrible. But sometimes
it can see brilliant in the moment, and then that's the thing is starlight sleep is an altered state of consciousness, and the things that we fear. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been laying in bed and worrying about something, and then when I got up in the morning, like, what was I worried about? That was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Do your characters ever come to you in your sleep?
I don't know. I don't know if they come to me then, but that's a good question. I find that one of the best times for writing is very early in the morning, and I do wake up early. I think you're still sort of in a dream state and less inhibited, and you're not watching yourself with that third eye of self-consciousness. And so you're more free to pour things out, and then you can fix them later, which is a lot of that.
Talk about being less inhibited, because what I see with writers, and I don't know if this is going to be true with you, is their first novel is much less inhibited than the subsequent novels. I'll give you an example. Tom Robbins said that he didn't feel like he really wrote a novel until he wrote Jitterbug Perfume. But some of those early novels, like Another Roadside Attraction, was a better ride to me, because he wasn't so concentrated on structuring a traditional novel. Do you feel that like, for instance, White Girl, which I have up on the screen right now, I'm just taking a look at some of the writing, and it's shows a real sense of freedom, I think. Do you think you were more free with your writing then than you were with My Notorious Life? Or do you feel that that's not necessarily the case?
I don't know. I think, with my first novel, I didn't know how to write a novel. I'd never written a novel before. I didn't even know if I had permission or standing to write a novel. But, as it came out on the page, it felt it felt exciting, and I thought maybe this is a real book.
Are you talking about White Girl? Or are you talking about?
Yeah, the first novel,
Mhm.
it felt a little bit frightening, perhaps because of the subject matter too, but just in the second novel I wrote actually never got published because I was, I think, more inhibited. I knew what it took to publish a book, and so I was maybe more self-conscious. And then when that book wasn't published, I just sort of thought, well, maybe I should be a teacher. Maybe I should give this up. But I couldn't give it up. And I just kept going, and I kept having fun with this strange voice on the page of Axie Muldoon, the narrator of My Notorious Life. And so I don't know, writers.
You couldn't give up that book, or you couldn't give up writing? Or are you
I
talking
couldn't
about?
give up writing. I couldn't give up
Tell me
writing.
why. Why can't you give up writing? Not that I'm suggesting you do that, or anybody would suggest that, but there's obviously something that ties you in a very emotional way to the writing.
Well, writing is really, really difficult. Writing is, as you know, is not, you don't just sit down and type out what the stuff in your head. And so I think people who do it, so, many people, and I'm one of them, are just compelled to do it. And I grew up in a household of painters. My mother and grandmother and uncle, we all were painters, and it seems to be a compelling urge to describe the world, or to get it down somehow and explain it, or else it just to convey that sense of what you've seen and heard and felt in a story or an image.
Now, you say visual images fuel your writing. Talk about that a little bit. How do you feed that? Do you literally seek out visual imagery to maybe even as a ritual before sitting down to write? Where do you access visual images, or is it more just happenstance?
Well, with My Notorious Life, I just happened to be looking at pictures of Jacob Riis, he wrote How the Other Half Lives, and he documented these homeless waifs on the streets of Manhattan. And there was one that was just riveting, of a little girl, probably 7 years old, with a baby on her lap, and she just looked fierce. And knowing what I knew, I just thought, well, what was she like, and what was life like for her? And same with my new novel, Gilded Mountain, which is set in 1900s Colorado. That one was prompted by finding an old photograph in my family's attic. It's a long sepia tinted panorama of 100 people standing in front of a mountain range. And I didn't know why it was in our attic. And when I asked my dad about it, he didn't know much. He just said, I think one of those guys is my grandfather, meaning my great grandfather. And I didn't know much about him, but I think he had something to do with quarrying the marble for the Lincoln Memorial. So I said, what, why didn't we know that? And he said, I don't know much about him. So when I set out to find a story, I found this small town in Colorado and a lot of images of workers toiling in a quarry with this beautiful white stone. And I just wondered about the lives of the women and found some great stories of a really strong newspaper editor, a woman who suffered severe consequences for speaking out against the marble company. And so a lot of these became ingredients for the storyline.
Now, you said your mother, your uncle, I think grandfather all painted. You also paint, Kate?
I painted. I mean, I played around with paints and drawing in college, but after that, I just decided to. I was just wordier than artists. A lot of artists are strictly visual, although my family rather verbal too.
Right. Now, you've been doing book signings, of course, to promote your books. Talk about book signings. What can you tell us about what you hear from the people who come to visit you to get a book signed? What do you look to accomplish during those, or what do people tell you? You just pick your shot here. I'm just curious what book signings are about. And is this just something, hey, it's a necessary thing that I need to do because I'm trying to promote my career, or do you actually look forward to them?
I think I look forward to them. I mean, it's so you stay alone with your book, your story, your characters for so long. These books have taken me 5, 8, 10 years to write. And so to meet readers and to meet booksellers who are enthusiastic and who've read your story and want to ask you questions about it is really gratifying. And I'm so grateful to independent booksellers in particular all over the country who press a book into a reader's hands and say, you'll like this one. If you like this, you're going to like that. And it's not an algorithm. It's not some number thing in a computer. It's real people saying, I read this and I think I know you and you'll like it. So it's fun for me to talk about the characters, and the history especially is stuff that I didn't know. I'm constantly finding a story and saying, how come I didn't know this? And it's so fascinating and important. Why didn't I know about the labor movement and this, Mother Jones and her fierce advocacy for workers? If I'm interested in this, I think other people will be too.
You don't just write for entertainment. You write to deliver information. You write to maybe help ameliorate some wrongs out there in society and so on. I mean, with White Girl, you're married to a Black man, Milo. Milo loves me. I believe this. I'm reading from your book. He loves me. He always said more than he loved himself, more than he loved screwing or skiing deep powder or drinking dark cognac, loved me despite her. I believe that. In his jail cell, where he is now, he writes to me, Charlotte, please, please. He wants me to come to see him. And it goes on from there. But it's, I wanted to read a little bit of that just because you really kind of get that sense. And then I'm leading to a question as well, but you get that sense, the freedom in the writing, the also just entanglement. There's entanglement there. There's another woman. He's in jail. He's Black, you're white. That alone creates conflicts with people who are not even part of the relationship in many cases. Did you ever date or marry a Black man?
No, dated, yes, but not married. No.
Did you need to do any particular research for this, or are human relations such that you don't feel like it's really that relationships are relationships in whatever size or color?
Well, both. I think that we know now, we especially know now, that book was written after the O.J. Simpson trial, so it was back in the 90s. I think we know more and more now about who has standing to write a story and what is necessary to write out of points of view and observation. And so I have many, many shelves of many books and had many, many conversations with friends and couples. And I think that those conversations are really important, and those books are important to write from all points of view. And it's important to do it right, to do it with respect, and to do it from an informed point of view. And not.
We have seen authors who write about a subject and they get excoriated by readers who say, you have no business writing this stuff. You're not Asian, you're not Black, or you're not a female. And there is this, kind of this expectation that you need, well, either to be part of that tribe or to clear some pretty big hurdles to be taken as legitimate.
I think that what's really exciting about our time right now is that there's been so much pressure to include voices that have been excluded for a long, long time. And that is all to the good. And it's a situation that's evolving, and I'm really so delighted to see books and novels by people who have been left out of the conversation, and there's plenty of room for all of it. And so that really delights me. I mean, when I was when I was writing My Notorious Life, for example, as I said, that, this was a history of a birth control pioneer who had been excoriated in her time and, made a lot of headlines and was basically hounded to suicide by a right-wing religious zealot named Anthony Comstock. And so I think that I write to educate myself in a lot of ways. This was not, same with Gilded Mountain. I did not know very much about our labor history. I didn't know what our ancestors went through in the mines and factories and what it took to get labor laws that gave people the right to strike, that gave people employment protections. And so if you saturate yourself in information and write out of a sense of hope and inspiration and but mostly storytelling, not to lecture, not to deliver a big history lesson, but just to tell what it's like on a human level.
Right. Keep it in art form as well.
Mm-hmm.
So during your book signings, I suppose you probably do a reading or two. Is that right? You do some reading?
Yeah, I do a little bit. I think sometimes readings can go on too long. I have a great slideshow that I love to, that sort of tells about the people, places, and events that.
Oh, interesting. Tell us about that.
Inspired.
So it's basically kind of a visual depiction. You said the people and places that you're really writing about.
Sure. So, for example, in Gilded Mountain, I saw this picture of women and children in deep snow, standing outside shacks at 9,000 feet of altitude in Colorado, and so I can show that picture. I can show pictures of the marble mine, which is this vast white cave with men working in tangles of wire and machinery. I can show pictures of workers shoveling a snowy railroad track where the snow is probably 14 feet deep, and they have to shovel the track in order to get the stone down the mountain. I can show pictures of the newspaper office where this woman editor was writing about, labor movements and strikes. And there was a big manor house up in the mountains of Colorado that I used to as a stand-in for the manor house in the story, owned by a coal baron and his wife, who was said to be a European countess. And so there are pictures of them. And, into the story, as I was doing research, I found a picture of King Leopold, who was this Belgian despot who did really hideous things in the Congo. But the tourist brochure I saw, it said, "Oh, King Leopold slept here," as if it was George Washington or some great character who had stayed in this place. And I thought, oh my gosh, they didn't say anything about his atrocities. And I didn't know whether I should put him in the novel, but it was too good a chance to pass up. And so he has a cameo. He makes a cameo in Gilded Mountain. And, then because he walked in, I discovered Deerfield, Colorado, which was a utopian community founded by African Americans trying to escape lynching, which was rampant in those days. And so, Deerfield is there because when you're writing about a marble quarry, you ultimately address questions of, who we honor in history, monuments and things like that. So Deerfield was this utopian place, and it's very, it was a real place. So that's in the book too.
It's really interesting, Kate. All of it, including the use of, a slideshow at the book signings. When you do read, what do you look to select? Do you select the same tract of copy each time, or do you play to the audience? What do you choose to read to them?
I usually actually have always, I guess I often go to the first paragraph, the first page of the book, partly because when I write, I try to write a hook, a line that will grab somebody and sort of set the story up. Maybe that's my background as a television producer, to tease the upcoming story. But so I usually read the first page because it contains elements of the story to come without giving anything away, really. That's what I usually do.
So let me ask you why you write. Well, I understand. Actually, let me rephrase the question. What I'm asking you is, what are the psychic or emotional rewards of writing in your case? You obviously you need to write. It's one of those things that it's like breathing to you. But after the work, not after the day's work or after the month's work, what is the psychic or emotional rewards that you glean from it?
I think it's really a privilege and a luxury to get to tell stories and to write stories. So I find it exciting. I find it moving. It's a way to always keep learning and to perfect a means of expression and really just tell a story. I think that's what I enjoy doing. So psychically, I don't think I've ever thought of it that way. It's just who I am.
Well, let's say somebody meets you, they find out you're a novelist, never read any of your work. Now, you're not a genre writer, but if they were to say to you, what is your subject matter as a writer, what would your reply be?
I think I like salvaging stories of people who I haven't seen on the page in my many years of reading. So I sometimes quote Virginia Woolf, who said, there's a girl behind the counter too. And I just as soon have her true history as the 150th life of Napoleon or the 70th biography of Keats. And so if you want to tell a woman's story, and I'm hungry to know what it was like in the past and what it's like now for us in this time, you have to look in the shadows and read between the lines and find someone's diary and then make up the rest. It's an act of imagination. That's what is.
Gotcha. Well, what would you say has been the biggest frustration of your career?
I guess it's that it takes me so long. I have 3 kids. I have elderly parents. I am always, pulled away from my work by life in general, as are most writers. And so it's that divided life where you could be on vacation, but you're on vacation and you think, oh, I should be working. So I've skipped a lot of vacations and let the family go off without me. But is it frustrating? I think that's what it is, just to be pulled away just when I get going, just when I have a chunk of days, and then something will pull me away from the work. When I worked as a journalist, or when I write nonfiction, I can write on a train. I could write, in a moving car with dogs barking. It doesn't bother me because it's a different kind of thinking. But to make stuff up or to imagine things, I really need my decks to be clear and to have no distractions.
Yeah.
Hard.
Yeah. I can tell you, anybody who writes nonfiction and then tries to write fiction just decides, well, let's write a novel. I think they are
For me, I probably had the opposite problem, because when I was a journalist or when I was working in television, I was always thinking, oh gosh, it would be so much better if you said it this way or you did that, or what if this happened? That would make it much better story. And so it's not really a good quality in a journalist.
Well, I'm sure you stayed between the lines.
I did.
Do you have any obsessions? Is there something that obsesses you?
Oh gosh. I guess language, kindness, especially these days. I am very concerned at the tenor of our times when people use language as weapons and ban books and accuse each other of all kinds of things without listening, without conversation. And so sometimes you feel that being a novelist is kind of pointless. I mean, considering the huge issues that confront us, but also if you're lucky enough to have a platform and a way to say something about kindness and injustice or community, then you're lucky to do it. So
yeah. And always remember that writers who live in totalitarian societies write stories that actually get the message out there, and it's the only way to do it. And it's done with enough subtlety that it doesn't get the censors after them, but at the same time, the thinking people out there who read those novels, they get the message, they understand, and it adds value for sure. What was a turning point in your writing life? Did you reach a point where you knew that I'm doing the right thing, or did you have a breakthrough along the way that you would consider your turning point?
A couple of things. I mean, I think when you get encouragement from teachers or from other readers of people that you respect, then keeps you going. There have been a couple of things along the way that have kept me going. And so a turning point, I moved around a lot as a kid, and so that means you're constantly trying to make new friends, and when you don't have any friends, my mom was a great storyteller, and she said, well, write it down here, put it in a story. And so I think I was always a writer from the time I was very young. But did I believe I could be a real writer? I don't know. I don't think I did. It was something I did in secret until, through journalism and a couple of classes that I stumbled into in college, I thought, well, maybe I could really do this, quote, for real,
Yes. What is the greatest, whether real or apocryphal, what's the greatest compliment received from a reader?
Gosh. Well, recently, the great writer Anna Quinlan, unprompted by me, shouted out how much she loved Gilded Mountain, and she had also loved My Notorious Life. And I took that as a great endorsement, because she's a voracious reader, a fine writer, a great judge of character. And so I lived off that and am living off of it for a long time. Right?
Yes, understandable. Is there a single author out there who is your biggest influence?
No, I wouldn't say a single. I mean, I think if you if I were made of books, I would be made of many, many great writers. Yeah, Harriet the Spy, Grimm's fairy tales, Faulkner, Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison, and lots of new writers coming along that it's very exciting to read. So I guess, when I was a little kid and people would say, oh, I'm so full, I can't eat another bite. I really thought that when you ate, your food started filling you up at your toes and filled you all the way up to your head. And I sort of feel like that about books, but I still have room for a lot more books. I still read as much as I can.
I love that you brought up Harriet the Spy, because I read that when I was a kid, and I literally started carrying a notebook and a pen around with me.
Yes.
It was such it just showed me early on that I certainly had a desire to observe and to write.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just a great story. You're the only author I've heard bring it up. I think you might be the only person in my life I've heard bring up Harriet the Spy. That's fantastic.
Oh yeah, Louise Fitzhugh has created a lot of writers, my own daughter included. She carried a notebook around for years too, and has landed as a writer herself. So
what gets you high when you're writing?
Oh, most of it is really it's really like laying tile a lot of times. The best times are when you just have a great page or a great paragraph, and the rest of the time, really, you're telling the story, you're laying it down, and then you're going over it and over it and over it, and cutting and changing and fixing and polishing, and many, many, many drafts. And I tend to write a section and then fix it. And when it feels like it's got some momentum, I write another one, and I just, keep pushing through the fog to get to the end. It takes a long time. It's a lot of hard work.
Do you ever write under the influence of anything?
No, I don't. I'm a straight arrow.
What is your writing regimen when you're full throttle working on a novel? What is your regimen like?
If I'm having a great day, I get up at 6 a.m. I'd get a cup of coffee. I let my dog out. And I sit that butt down in the chair and I work, and I try not to get distracted, and I try not to check email or anything. And if I'm feeling distractible, I'll set a timer and work in 20-minute increments and just say nothing. You can't do anything until that timer goes off, and then another 20 minutes and another 20 minutes. And I'm only really good until, 12 or 1 or 2. And then
that's 6 or 8 hours right there.
Yeah.
And writing is for anybody who has never written, doesn't understand how exacting a process it is. It takes a lot of energy to write. So that's a good long stretch there if you can get it done.
Yeah, but don't you just sometimes feel, I know I do, oh, well, what did you do today? Well, I think I moved a comma. I think I ripped up everything I did yesterday.
I come a little bit more from the Julia Cameron school, where it's, you just get some words on the page, lay track. And even if you're going to throw it away, you just have to keep it moving. Now, but then there's also the rewriting process, which, I could see that's obviously a slower process if you've got something that's already been somewhat vetted and you're working with it. Now, would you write every day during the good times when you are in high productivity mode?
Yeah, I think I always think like, okay, it's January, so the school vacations are over and the holidays are over. So I'll January and February should be good months, and and I think the decks are relatively clear. But I tend to rewrite as I'm going, because I'll just not. I don't feel the story has momentum, and that's probably what takes me so long. Plus, you
Oh,
forget,
interesting.
what color eyes did that guy have, and how old is he, and how old is the baby, and you have to go back.
Yeah, I make side notes sometimes. I have the name of each of the character, and then I continue to add some notes so that I don't try to identify an eye color a second time or get that wrong. I know exactly what you mean, because there's so many, there's just so much copy that you're working with. Once you get halfway through a piece of work, it's
Yeah.
easy to lose track. So any rituals that you observe for writing, anything that you do that kind of sets the table for you? Obviously you get your cup of coffee, but I don't know whether there's anything ritualistic that kind of sets the mood or puts you in a certain frame of mind.
Besides tearing my hair out,
Yeah.
opening the window and watching the New Yorkers go by walking their dogs. No, I don't really have any charms or spells that I no, I don't have those. Maybe I should. You know any good ones? Let me know.
I talked to one writer. I don't know if this is a ritual, but she created a soundtrack. She picked songs that she felt were inspirational for writing. And I'm not sure if she just listened to that to get herself energized and in the mood, or she would actually listen while writing. Could you listen to anything while writing, or do you need it to be completely silent?
I need it to be completely silent. I do have a couple good readers. They're friends of mine, from writers I've known since college. And so when I feel that I have something that's not embarrassing and I'm not quite sure whether it's real, I'll send it to them and they'll say, nah, or they'll say, you know what, this has got something here, keep going. And I trust them. So, but I know they won't, because I know they won't be too cruel, and we'll have really smart feedback.
Right.
That's important, I think, for you to have.
To what degree do you outline the book, Kate, versus allowing it to be organic?
Once I have a beginning and an ending, I guess as I go along, I kind of have vague ideas of things that I want to have in there, like, oh, well, I'll need a chapter where this happens and this is supposed to happen. So I have a vague list of chapters. And once I'll say, okay, so this has to happen next and this has to happen next. So more or less vague chapter lists.
What do you consider to be the strongest part of your writing game? I mean, Elmore Leonard, they used to say that the guy writes dialogue like he invented it. For you, is it creating characters? Is it dialogue? Is it mood? Is it pacing? What do you think is your number one strength as a writer?
I think I hope somebody would agree with it, but I guess if I were to hope, it would be capturing this very specific detail and metaphor and in a way to carry emotion without overt description of it. I don't like it when writers revert to language of, I don't know, cliche. So finding a new way to say something, getting a detail that carries emotion for you is something I strive to do. And I could only explain that by, finding an example, which I don't have at my fingertips, but I like metaphor and simile and language and rhythm of sentence structure. But I believe plot is and character equally important. So all of those things, I hope I get them right.
Yeah, it is amazing how even with professional novelists, how often common phrases and cliches are there. And you think, why wouldn't they have made an effort to go back and come up with either some fresh wording or, as you say, a metaphor a simile, something that just takes it into a different place. Talk about the Proxy Project. This is a get out the vote effort that you're part of, trying to get young people to get out and vote. Young people are not, they don't vote in high percentages. And yet so much of what's going on, they're going to be living with for maybe a good long time. What can you tell us about why you're working on that project? And maybe you have the answer as to why so many young people don't actually get to the polls.
I think there's a lot of answers for that, but I'll tell you, it started in 2018 with a friend of mine, Susan Addis Stone, who was part of the impetus to get a woman on the $20 bill, to get a woman on the money. And that's what led to Harriet Tubman being voted to be on the $20 bill. And so she ran Women on 20s, and we were talking about the midterm elections coming up. And this was when the Parkland shooting happened in Florida, and the students there were so smart and so activated and so vocal and so mobilized, and yet they couldn't vote. They were in high school, and they were dying for their adults and representatives to do something about this violence. And we thought this is the perfect time for high school students and others who don't have that voice to say, I can't vote, but you can. So do it for me. So be my proxy at the polls, and I will, I'll just get you to the polls. And so we had this idea that it would be kind of a matching setup. So a high school student or an immigrant, a dreamer would say, I can't vote, but do it for me, to their neighbor or their older brother in college, and motivate them to do it. And so we worked on this for up until the election. I guess I can't remember exactly the dates, but we got teams in schools in 35 states, and we really thought it was a very good model. But as you say, it was hard to get kids motivated. A lot of them, in terms of absentee ballots, they didn't even know how to get a stamp because they were so used to email. So there were a lot of obstacles. And what we realized is that voting and participation in a democracy is about civics, a civic education, and what it means to be a citizen. And so we got this just before the pandemic. A series of schools called the Democracy Prep Public Schools adopted the Proxy Project as a platform. And so we turned it over to them in hopes that they would perfect it and get their high school students, which were involved in a civics education, to use it. And they have done it, but the pandemic kind of got in the way. And I still have hopes. We still have hopes for it as a good model for educating students to understand what a ballot is, what it means to register, to help. Because a lot of kids are like, I'm 18, but nobody ever told me how to vote. I don't know how to do this, and I'm scared of it. And do I have to walk in? And so particularly for disenfranchised people, it's an important lesson. And that was what motivated us to do it.
I just saw David Hogue on one of the news channels yesterday. He's probably the major activist that came out of that Parkland shooting, or at least he's been the most upfront in the media, and an impressive kid. And he continues to work at it. Let me ask you about, you were a creative writing instructor at Bard High School. It's called Bard High School Early College. Is that right? In Manhattan.
Yeah.
Talk about teaching creative writing. Because there are people who believe, well, you can't teach creative writing. You can't really teach writing. People either have it, their brain works that way, or it doesn't. But obviously there's people who are looking to be more creative with their writing. What are some of the elements or suggestions that you made to your students that to try to amp up the creativity?
Well, yeah, I'll talk about that in one second, but I'll quickly give a shout out to the Bard early college high schools. Bard College has these early college high schools in Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Cleveland, New Orleans, Newark, and soon the Bronx, and some other places. The model is that a lot of kids are bored by high school, and that many students are very engaged and challenged by difficult materials, college materials. So if you go to Bard High School, early college, you graduate from high school after 10th grade, and then you begin to take college credits in 11th and 12th. And by the time you get out of what would be 12th grade, you have an associate's degree from Bard. You have 2 years of college credit, and you can use that to go on to college or go straight into a job. And for many of my students, they were the first generation to have any kind of college degree. They were the first generation Americans. And it's their stories that I found really exciting. So I would have them keep a writer's notebook. I would ask them to write 2 pages a day. I said, I don't care what you write. You can write what you had for breakfast, but notice things and get down details and get the muscles of your hand moving, the brain connection to your hand, and get away from your phone. And so, they would read memoir and novels, and I tried to give them material that would resonate with them and their lives and languages. And I think, we played a game, speaking of cliches, we played a game called Cliche Assassin, and they would bring in cliches and write them on the board, and we would try to think of a different way to say something,
That sounds great.
They're great students. Their voices are incredible. They all became very good writers, I think. Mostly, I would they would turn in their 20-page papers, and I would hand them back and say, okay, I'm handing these back, and here's a page of someone in this class, and don't be scared when you see all these X marks and these comments and these lines, and I'm not going to tell you whose this is until the end of the class, and don't be worried, but they all look like this. And so at the end of the class, I would say, okay, now I'm going to tell you whose page this is, and they would all tremble, and I'd say, hey, it's mine. This is what I do to myself.
Oh, wow. Interesting exercise. Yes. I love that system. That Bard High School early college system you just described sounds great as well. I love that cliche assassin. Wow. That's great stuff. Now, do you write by hand? I heard you talking about, take your pencil or pen, write in that notebook a couple pages a day. Are you a handwriter?
I am more and more. I was, and then when I was a journalist, I wrote on a word processor, and of course I write on a computer. But a lot of times when I really need to think about something, I sit there with the pen and paper, and it's much more liberating to do it that way because it doesn't feel like it counts. And you can, you write it out, and then you type it up, and then you fix it. But it's I think much more direct, at least for me, connection between the work and your brain.
I've heard that before. Interesting. So, Kate, to the aspiring novelists out there, whether they're just starting out trying to get something completed or they're very early on, what would your advice be to the would-be or aspiring novelist?
First of all, don't do it. Second of all, if you have to do it, well, then do it. Don't just say, oh, I've always had a novel I want to write. Well, sit down and write it again and write it another time and read and read and read and read and look at the work that you admire and keep it next to you. And when you're first starting, there's nothing wrong with trying to write like that person. If you like Faulkner, or if you like Junot Diaz, or if you like Kylie Reid or vampire novels, well, look at them not like a reader, but like a writer, and ask yourself, How is she doing that? What is she doing here? Break it down, mark up the book and say, okay, well, here Edna O'Brien went from first person to third person. Oh, and here she's going from present tense to past tense. Can I do that? Well, yeah, you can. But look at the way the writer is working and challenge yourself to read like a writer, and then do it every day.
It's interesting you say that it's okay to try to write like Faulkner if that's who your favorite author is or hero is. I believe it was Hunter Thompson started off his writing career by opening up Hemingway novels, and he would type everything he was reading. He would just type up his novels so that he could understand the cadence of sentences and the pacing of the novel. And interestingly, Hunter Thompson's writing was a million miles away from what Ernest Hemingway did.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, he learned to write by imitating somebody who ultimately he made a stark departure from. But there was the value there. There was the value there in learning the cadence.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of writers do that, and they start out learning by imitating and practicing that way. I mean, right now there's a lot of young people who write fan fiction. They'll pick a young adult novel they love, and they learn to write by mimicking the structure of those books. So I think it's a good thing to do, because you're really only going to ever have your own voice, as long as you're not plagiarizing.
Right. Well, Kate Manning, congratulations on the success of your books, and thank you so much for coming on the program, and best of luck with all of your future endeavors.
Well, thank you, Mike, because you ask wonderful, interesting questions, and it's really a privilege to talk to another writer who understands the difficulties and the pleasures and of the work. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.